In this special edition of UNM News, we'll look at the changing sexual climate on campus.
In light of a Department of Justice report mandating sexual reporting and investigation changes.
And how UNM students rallied to take back the night. I'm Allison Romero.
I'm Kateri Zuni, and this is UNM News.
On April 22nd, the U.S. Department of Justice released a report containing the results of an 18-month investigation on the University of New Mexico's Title IV and Title IX compliance. Federal Title IV prohibits sex discrimination by public colleges and universities, and Title IX, which prohibits sex discrimination by schools receiving federal financial aid. According to the report, the Department of Justice started the investigation in December 2014. After receiving complaints from multiple students alleging that UNM did not respond adequately to their reports of sexual assault. The report cited complaints about confusion and delays when investigating sexual assault, insensitive and traumatic university-led investigations, and failure to provide interim safety measures, supports, and services to victims who file complaints. It also cited a campus culture that afforded preferential treatment to certain students, particularly athletes or those affiliated with fraternities, while approaching reports of sexual assault with skepticism or indifference.
Their 37-page Department of Justice report acknowledged that the University of New Mexico had already undertaken a number of remedies to improve the situation. Nevertheless, it charged UNM to address 5 key concerns. First, provide training to students, faculty, and staff on sexual harassment, including sexual assault. That includes information on reporting grievances and employee obligations, where victims can go for help, and information on grievance procedures and outcomes. Second, provide a grievance procedure and investigative routines that produce prompt and equitable resolution of sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations. Third, investigate or respond to all reports of sexual harassment and assault, as well as allegations of retaliation against those who filed the reports. Fourth, take prompt and effective steps to eliminate a hostile environment and prevent its recurrence. Fifth, ensure that Title IX coordinators and investigators receive adequate training to do their jobs.
UNM had already taken steps to remedy some of the situations taken up by the DOJ report through what has come to be called the Pilgrim Report, that the university issued in January 2015. That 71-page document, produced by the law firm Pilgrim & Associates, had already called on the university to streamline and simplify its 17 conflicting and confusing policies on sexual assault. It also recognized the need to remove obstacles to reporting such behaviors and outlined the information and due process rights of both victims and perpetrators. Given these ongoing efforts, UNM President Robert Frank expressed his disappointment that some 15 months later, the DOJ report focused on some of the problems the school had already addressed after the release of the Pilgrim Report.
We don't believe the report represents the very intense efforts that the University of New Mexico has undertaken to improve our processes, to improve the way that we have looked out for the safety and the processes to help our students who engage adverse events on this campus. Our strongest objection is with their conclusion that this is a hostile environment. If you look at the fine print that's buried in there, you'll note that their definition of a hostile environment is if one event happens on a campus. By that definition, virtually every university in America is a hostile campus. We believe that we can always improve how the university responds to issues that appear on our campus, and we continuously work to improve our processes so that they're fair and equitable to all parties that are involved.
Frank described the Justice Department report as anecdotal and a snapshot rather than a more scientific analysis of campus trends. Still, he pledged to work with the Department of Justice.
We're going to sit down and look at the report and look at every recommendation and begin implementing those recommendations as quickly as we can. We will have a full-out effort to do that as fast as our staff can work on it. We will meet with the DOJ at the earliest possible date to begin a dialogue with them about the changes we can make.
New Mexico and UNM may be in need of change. A 2013 study shows that 1 in 4 women in New Mexico will be the victim of rape or attempted rape during her lifetime, and that 1 in 20 men will suffer a similar fate. That's about 25% above the national averages. Since 2014, UNM PD has improved its method for reporting and addressing sexual assault. According to UNM PD's annual safety report, 19 sexual assaults have been reported since October 1st, 2015, which is an increase from previous reports going back to 2012. In April, Student Alliance for Reproductive Rights member Kathy Cook rallied as part of the Take Back the Night campaign.
We wanted to bring attention to sexual violence because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and to open up dialogue between students about sexual violence and campus safety.
Take Back the Night was an international event designed to create safer communities by heightening awareness of all forms of sexual violence.
If the recent and future awareness campaigns like Take Back the Night and the UNM-sanctioned Lobo Respect initiative are effective, they should improve the campus climate.
Although encouraging students and employees to report sexual indiscretions initially tends to increase the number of complaints, reducing sexual instances of sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, and assaults is the ultimate goal, and that would improve the campus climate. Sexual or gender discrimination involves treating someone unfavorably because of that person's sex or because that person does not conform with sex stereotypes. Sexual harassment is a blanket term. It's defined federally as unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, including unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or nonverbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature, such as sexual assault or acts of sexual violence. Sexual assault is any type of sexual contact or behavior that occurs by force without consent of the recipient of the unwanted sexual activity, including fondling without consent. There are other specifically prohibited sexual-related activities, such as voyeurism, stalking, dating violence, non-consensually capturing and transmitting images or recordings, as well as domestic violence involving an intimate partner.
The Department of Justice is calling upon colleges and universities to conduct their own administrative investigations under the Title IX and Title IV requirements. These administrative investigations are apart from any criminal investigations of sexual misconduct. Instead, schools are expected to examine the evidence and reach their own conclusions without waiting to see the results of a criminal investigation. The determination of an offense in this case is based on probable cause, or if the preponderance of the evidence suggests that an offense has been committed. Typically, that occurs when there is greater than a 50% chance that the complaint is true. That's a very different standard than the one used by law enforcement and the courts in criminal proceedings. That standard is the beyond a reasonable doubt standard needed to convict someone of a crime. So while an ongoing criminal investigation and trial may take many months, the Department of Justice is requiring schools to also perform their own separate and expedited administrative investigations, and thereby come to conclusions in advance of this traditional legal system. That means schools could be dishing out suspensions or other school-based punishments long before criminal investigations are concluded, and charges are either filed or dropped.
Earlier, we met with 2 UNM experts to find out more about the DOJ report and its aftermath. Heather Cowan returned to UNM's Office of Equal Opportunity in 2013 after working at the University of Michigan as Title IX investigator. She was the Title IX compliance officer before becoming the new Title IX coordinator, and is responsible for developing a campus culture that supports a safe and respectful campus by ensuring that UNM meets all obligations under the federal law.
Mike Busch is a longtime journalist and currently an instructor in the UNM Department of Communication and Journalism. On his last journalistic assignment, Dr. Busch covered UNM for the Albuquerque Journal during the time when the U.S. Justice Department first focused its attention on the university.
Welcome to the show, Heather, or Ms. Cowan and Dr. Busch.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and I'll start off with the first question, and I did want to address it to you, Ms. Cowan. Okay. So we did talk about the 2013 study that addressed 1 in 4 women in New Mexico are at risk for sexual assault, and that correlates to the 1 in 20 men that will suffer a similar fate. I just wanted to know, why is it the case that New Mexico is leading the nation in these averages?
So I actually was looking for
the studies that showed that it was higher in New Mexico than across the nation. So all the studies that I've read nationally and the surveys that have been done, like the American Association of Universities that did a big study last fall, they're all showing between 17 and 20% of women who are victims of completed or attempted sexual assault, and the 1 in 20 men is pretty standard national average.
Okay. Do you think that there's a bigger problem for UNM students other than the general population, in your opinion?
I think college students are at a higher risk of sexual assault and sexual violence than members of the general population. There's a lot of factors that go into it. There's, emerging research now. There hasn't been that much research done. Dr. David Lisak is probably our premier person. He started doing this research, about 20, maybe 30 years ago. And they all sort of show that, especially young undergraduate women in their first 6 weeks on campus, that's called, we refer to it as the red zone, it's when they're most likely to be, potential victims of sexual violence.
Okay. Kateri, did you have a question?
Yeah, Dr. Busch, how did you become involved in the issue?
Well, I was covering higher education for the Albuquerque Journal, and a big part of the higher education beat is UNM. And so I know a lot of people who work here, particularly some of the top administrators. I knew the Dean of Students, Tomas Aguirre, who was here at the time, who was intimately involved in fighting the problem as well.
In your coverage of UNM as a journalist, how has UNM done on the issue of sexual assault on campus prior to 2016?
In my opinion, I think they've done a remarkably good job in covering it. I know Dr. Aguirre, Tomas Aguirre, did all he could to fight it. I know Bob Frank, the president of the university, abhors sexual harassment and sexual violence, and he does all he can, as does his staff and everyone else I know. Now, when it gets down to the lower ranks, I don't know what goes on there. As a journalist, I'm not privy to all the information that can come from the university.
When were you first aware of this issue with UNM?
Well, I had heard about it, and I know it's not unusual on college campuses nationwide, but there was a young woman who accused 2 Lobo football players and another young man of raping her just in April 2014. Later, or as the events unfolded, it turned out that she may not have been telling the entire truth, and I'm putting that kind of mildly. Meanwhile, these young men's pictures were on the front of the newspaper, their mugshots. They were on television in orange jumpsuits, and their reputations were destroyed by these allegations that the plaintiff had made.
And regarding consent, going back to you, Heather, Ms. Cowan, could you tell us a little bit about exactly what consent is, definitive?
So consent is defined differently across the country, right? UNM has adopted what we call an affirmative or positive consent policy, and that means that an absence of no or silence does not equal consent. So all parties at every level of sexual activity have to provide some kind of affirmative consent to show that they do indeed want to engage in that sexual activity. And that doesn't have to be verbally, it can be through action. But really we're trying to teach our students that, whether you're seeking or whether you're seeking to engage in sexual activity or whether you're being sought to engage in sexual activity, we want everyone who's sort of in that to really be aware. Am I wanting to engage in this activity? Is my partner wanting to engage in this activity? Are we all affirmatively consenting to engage in this activity? Some people call it enthusiastic consent.
So, Ms. Cowan, what would we constitute unwanted physical contact or expression?
Unwanted physical contact or expression?
What would we constitute or consider, what constitutes unwanted physical activity?
So let me sort of break it down, I guess, a little bit. So like unwanted physical contact would be if I touch you and you don't want me to touch you. right? So physical contact. If it's sexual in nature, then it's going to be touching of breasts or buttocks or genitals, what anyone would sort of consider to be sexual in nature, if a reasonable person considers it to be sexual in nature. An unwanted expression, you said?
Yes. Excuse me, verbal expressions.
So that could be, if I, people who maybe tell jokes of a sexual nature, somebody who's commenting on somebody's body parts or appearance, somebody who's asking someone out, for dates or to engage in sexual activity. All of those things could potentially be unwanted expressions, verbal expressions of a sexual nature.
Okay, thank you. So again, the 2013 report indicated that in New Mexico, 1 in 12 women and 1 in 40 men will be subjected to incapacitated rape. How does using drugs and alcohol affect consent?
Right, so certainly if somebody is so intoxicated that they are to the point of incapacitation, right? They are unconscious, they're passed out, they're sleeping, things like that would become much against university policy to engage in sexual activity with somebody who is unconscious. In terms of other levels of intoxication, right? So for anyone who's ever drank alcohol, now I'm going to assume that that's a lot of us in this world. We all know that you can have a beer or a glass of wine and not feel intoxicated at all. Or you could have several shots and feel very intoxicated and maybe not being able, you're starting to stumble, you're starting to slur your words, maybe you're, gonna vomit from the alcohol. You don't necessarily know where you are. You're having difficulty walking. Some people, once it eventually gets into alcohol poisoning, you have difficulty breathing, all of those things. So once we pass into that point, and it's a really difficult point because it's different for every single person. It's not like I can say you had 4 drinks in 2 hours and therefore you were too intoxicated to provide meaningful consent, because that's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be different on body weight. It's going to be different on past alcoholic consumption, what you've eaten, what you haven't eaten, if there's other drugs involved, if there's medication involved, all of those things are factors. So we start to look for sort of factors, things that a reasonable person would know in those circumstances if somebody was too intoxicated to provide consent. Are they stumbling, not knowing where they are? Are they passing in and out of consciousness? Are they vomiting? Are they slurring their words? Do they need assistance in walking? Those are sort of the things that we would look for to say, would you, as a person who's seeking to engage in sexual activity with this person who is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, would you know that reasonably they could not provide what we call meaningful or informed consent?
That brings me back to the DOJ investigation with UNM. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Busch, I know that there's the Lobo Respect. They're taking initiative in response to this investigation. Do you know how much it's going to cost UNM with these programs that they want to use to help with essentially it's just in response?
I really don't. However, they had programs in place earlier than the DOJ investigation. And there were, as I recall, 17 of them. And it was very confusing to me as a reporter trying to cover events on campus when I would be referred from one office to another, to another, to another, some of whom wouldn't speak to me at all or provide any information. But I would imagine that these 17 programs that were in place at the time probably cost as much as the Lobo Respect, or maybe even more.
In your opinion, do you think that there has been a growth in the way that these programs are being enacted or, displayed to the students?
Yeah, I think that they've been, first of all, they've been consolidated to try to make it simpler. As far as the education to the students, I'm not sure. I know that in the new student orientation, there is some talk about what constitutes sexual harassment and sexual assault. Exactly what that is, I don't know. And from what I understand from talking to a couple of students, that it's not as intensive as it might be. Now, that may have changed recently. I know when the Pilgrim Report came out last year, there was a big emphasis on making things simpler and making things more welcome to potential victims of sexual assault.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cowan, what do you think, the same question, do you think there's been a positive progress with these programs, that they've gradually been more helpful to students?
I do. I think that we've made tremendous progress. So if I think back to where we were when I came back to the University of New Mexico in the summer of 2013 to where we are now, I'm really proud of the work we've done. I think we've really made huge leaps and bounds in not that much time, considering. Also, even before the DOJ came back with their report, we recognized that there were still things that we wanted to do even better. So there were already things that we've been working on and putting in place. I think the Lobo Respect initiative is pretty huge. It's pretty monumental. It has the advocacy center that's confidential, so anyone can go there and talk and, try to figure out what they want to do without it sort of triggering an automatic criminal or automatic university response. So I think that's really beneficial. They have a 24/7 hotline. I think that's really beneficial. Our new policy on sexual violence and sexual misconduct is much improved. Has much improved the sort of the policy climate. And the DOJ report does say that while there are still some areas in our policies where there's some overlap and there's some confusion around which policy sort of is overarching, they do say that the sexual violence and sexual misconduct policy by itself is compliant with Title IX and Title IV.
Okay.
Ms. Cowan, do you know, or you have an idea of whether or not UNM has budgeted to handle the DOJ investigation going forward?
So budget is definitely not my area of expertise. I know that we were just given permission to hire 2 more investigators in our office, so that's pretty huge. That's more investigators than our office has ever had. So we're really excited about that. I know UNM has budgeted for some pretty comprehensive online education and training programs for our students, staff, and faculty that are all being put in place this year. So our staff and faculty all have it already as of, I think with all the technical problems, I think it went into effect in February or March. And then the students, seniors should have gotten the requirement to take it this semester, and then next fall it'll be mandatory for all of our students. And then there's been an increase to our budget to train our Title IX coordinator, me and our investigators. So there's been a lot of progress, but I don't know actual numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Now, my last question for you, Ms. Cowan, it's going to be a little bit of a lengthy one, but just given that there are different investigations with different outcomes that do occur on campus, does that could have different conclusions? Does this possibility set in institutions like UNM with deep pockets for lawsuits from perpetrators who are pronounced guilty and sanctioned in an administrative procedure but are not charged after a criminal investigation or found guilty in a criminal trial? Do you think this will occur because of this?
So we live in a country where anyone can sort of sue anyone for anything.
Right.
So there's that. What I say about that is, so my office, we are in charge of civil rights, and Title IX is a civil rights law. So we're in charge of ensuring civil rights compliance at the University of New Mexico. Criminal justice proceedings are to determine if a crime has occurred, and that's not what my office does. So if we go through an investigation and we say that a sexual assault has occurred, then we're saying that it's a Title IX violation. We're calling that a severe form of sexual harassment, which is a form of gender discrimination and a violation of the code of conduct. And we do have a much lower standard of evidence than the criminal justice system. So while anyone who's unhappy with the outcome of an action that the university has taken could certainly be litigious about it, I think we still, as a university, we still need to just do our job and ensure a safe, comfortable climate and campus for all of our students, staff, and faculty.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add before we close?
I'd like to criticize, if I may, the Department of Justice letter to the university. One thing that it pointed out is that it wants the university to provide a grievance procedure and investigative routines, which is fine, that produce prompt and equitable resolution of sexual harassment. And I think if you try to rush through something, you can overlook evidence or miss evidence or misconstrue evidence, and there could be a problem in that. There's also as President Frank has pointed out, the Justice Department standard for a hostile environment includes any campus in which one incident has occurred. And how do you erase an incident of rape, let's say, when it has occurred? You can't. It's a fact. And yet the DOJ is calling on the university to erase this hostile environment, if it is indeed a hostile environment. My experience on the campus of UNM is that it is not a hostile environment.
Heather, did you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, so I was talking earlier about, what we do is the civil rights realm, and hostile environment in the civil rights realm is very specific to instances of sexual harassment or other forms of discrimination and harassment that equal a hostile environment for that person. So for sexual harassment, it's conduct of a sexual nature that is unwanted, unwelcome, is severe, persistent, or pervasive, and interferes with somebody's ability to work or learn. And that's what constitutes a hostile environment for the person affected. And the DOJ report does say that sort of, in one line, that the hostile environment that they found for us was for those who were affected. And I would agree with that. For a student who has been sexually assaulted, yes, that is conduct of a sexual nature that is unwanted or unwelcome, that is severe and interferes with their ability to work or learn. But I also agree with Dr. Busch and President Frank that, that's a very specific definition for somebody who has experienced that. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single person at UNM is experiencing this hostile environment.
Right. Thank you very much. We'd like to thank both of you for your time here. And again, that is Ms. Heather Cowan and Dr. Mike Busch that are with us today. Thank you for watching UNM News. I'm Allison Romero.
And I'm Kateri Zuni.
Thank you.